Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Tony Vickers-Byrne. Tony has 30 years experience at HR director and board advisor level, and that includes being Public Health England's first HR director and CIPD's chief advisor for HR practice. So one of the most interesting aspects of Tony's journey, in my opinion, is the change of mindset he underwent in how he approached his work. And this was fairly late on in his career. And you'll hear this in our conversation. And it was thanks in large part to a couple of inspirational leaders who happened to cross his path. And you'll hear Tony, really speak passionately about those two leaders in our conversation. So Tony's a brilliant storyteller, and he paints a brilliant picture of how this change came about. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Tony Vickers-Byrne. Tony, hello and welcome to the Work Well podcast.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you keeping?
Yeah, it's just on a bit of a roll at the moment. We've recently moved to Dublin, and we've taken over as directors of our Residents Association. And it's been a bit of a baptism by fire. We had the gutters cleaned on Friday. We've had the windows cleaned at the moment. You may get some splashback as we're talking. Having the grass cut tomorrow morning. But it's been a fascinating experience. It's small units, nine of us, but some of us have been here for a number of years. Some, like me, have just blow-ins. And to try to get people's confidence about making change and getting things done and doing things in a different way. You can see the similarity between running a large organization in terms of bringing people along and developing their trust. But we're on a roll at the moment. We're getting stuff done, so that's good news.
Brilliant. Yeah, so really productive by the sounds of it, and clearly, so you're the skills you've built up across your career as, let's say, Public Health England's first HR director, and I think most recently CIPD's chief advisor for HR practice. Those skills are being used now today to work with the Residents Association.
But yeah, I mean, just looking back over those last two jobs, they were incredibly enjoyable, but very challenging as well. I mean, particularly the Public Health England one. I mean, with the CIPD one, it was great to work with Peter Cheese, who's the chief executive of CIPD. And my role really was to go around to all of the branches, including overseas, and actually talk about the key messages that were coming through from Peter and the senior management team at CIPD, which was about flexible working, which was about health and well-being, which was about diversity and inclusion. All of those messages, which, 2 or 3 years later, during the pandemic, were right at the forefront of every leader's agenda. Hopefully they still are, but we can talk through that, I think, over the course of the next half hour or so. But I found when I was speaking to the HR people themselves, they understood it, they got it, they realized that they had a really, really important job to actually safeguard the ethics of the organization, to make sure the organization served its people and looked after the public and looked after its communities as well. But so often, like the hurly-burly of operational management and financial control and so on, just, that these key messages got lost. And I think it was really reassuring for them, for Peter and myself, to go out and actually say, look, this is really important. We'll support you. We'll send these messages out as well, that well-being, diversity and inclusion, staff engagement are the key issues for HR, and it's how we actually will be judged going forward. The PHE one, gosh, it's during the lockdown, I used to see people I used to work with regularly on the television at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, stood beside Boris or Matt Hancock talking about the latest issues with the pandemic, and just the pressure that these people were under to deliver and to keep so many people happy, keep politicians happy, keep scientists happy, keep the public happy, as well as keeping that absolute integrity and professionalism. And even though I'd retired by then, I retired in March 2020, just seeing people like Jonathan Van Tam and Jenny Harris on there, it made me feel really proud. And they were great, and they've many of them have been rewarded since. And I think it was a huge boost for public health as well. I think certainly in the UK, public health sometimes was seen as a bit of a Cinderella medical discipline. You know, that the high qualifying graduates from the medical schools went into surgery or medicine, and actually it showed that when something like a pandemic happens, you know, just how vital it is to everybody's day-to-day living, and the importance of public health and those messages and the support that they could give. So, you know, looking back at this, you know, in years to come, public health will say, well, gosh, you know, thank goodness we had the infrastructure there to be able to support people in the way that we could.
And how do you think the one area in Ireland and England and others, I'm sure, across the pandemic, it was the frontline workers that bore a lot of the brunt of what was happening. And well, a lot of us were able to work from home. That certainly wasn't the case for frontline workers.
Yeah.
How was that? How do you think that? I know you had just retired, but how do you think that was in England? How are the teams now? I mean, are they feeling burned out? Are they kind of reinvigorated now, or what's your own kind of assessment of that?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I mean, my wife's a psychologist, and she was doing lots of online work with people in the NHS, providing them with support. You know, because people who'd been you know, on call for 24 hours, people who hadn't been able to actually get any proper sleep, people who were worried about their own families and friends when they left the hospitals and the healthcare settings, you know, they were definitely at burnout. And, you know, it was vitally important, I think, that people like Fiona, my wife, and other experts were able to be there and provide that support. I remember talking when the first lockdown stopped. I think it was around about September 2020, and people started to go back into the workplaces, and certainly in the NHS, people were going back much more so into back office functions within hospitals. And I remember talking to a group of non-executive directors at a big hospital trust in the south of England, talking about the way the pandemic had impacted on them as an organization. And they were saying that over the course of the last sort of 6 months, they'd had no option but to take the reins off. They had to trust people to run the organizations effectively at an operational level. They couldn't still be insisting on, you know, the same level of financial reporting and activity reporting and so on. And generally, they felt that the clinicians had done a fabulous job in terms of doing what they could for patients and, you know, really kind of maximizing the use of resources during a terrible time. And what their real concern was now was that hospitals would be expected to go back to the old situation where they had to report on activity, they had to send information through on a regular basis, you know, to satisfy that machine of churning data. And the non-executives felt really uncomfortable about it. And, you know, that they found that they were getting real kickback, particularly from clinical staff who'd had that responsibility, who'd had to take that responsibility during that first lockdown. And now it was back to normal. And I think it really sends out the message that, you know, the future, it's all about individuals being creative and dynamic. You know, there's no one model suits all. I mean, the hybrid working model that was introduced, you know, in many organizations, and you know, great credit for them to do it, but it was in an emergency situation. You know, if you were looking at it now and were able to plan and work it through and personalize it more, would you do it the same way? And the answer is probably not. And so, you know, I think the future of hybrid working, and my goodness, there's an appetite for it, you know, is about leaders sitting down with, you know, their teams and actually working out how it can work for them, rather than saying, well, this is how such and such organization did it. This is how we did it during 2021. Times are changing, thank goodness. And now's an opportunity to actually think it through and you know, get it really right for that individual organization and that individual team.
Very good. So, and you shared a link with me in advance of this, related to the Great Resignation, but the term I liked in that actually was the Great Renegotiation. So it's employers having conversations with employees about their needs and wants, as opposed to kind of dictating what the hybrid model would look like in this workplace. Well, of course, or inviting them all back full time, or dictating here is the exact hybrid model that we are following. It's more about a negotiation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy the McKinsey newsletters that come out. If you just go onto their site, you can log in and receive a whole load of different newsletters and summaries and so on. And they have some really interesting research pieces that are carried out by McKinsey consultants. And the one that we're talking about, Brian, which I found over the weekend, it was carried out in America, Europe and Australia in November last year. And they interviewed about 1,400 people through a survey. And anyway, I've got some of the figures here. 4/5 of the people who were working in hybrid models at the time over the previous 2 years prefer them to going back straight to the office. And here's one, talking about the Great Resignation, that 2/3 of the people who prefer hybrid would look for other opportunities with other organizations if they were having to go back into the office full time.
So in other words, if their employer dictates you need to be back in the office, they will be looking elsewhere for employment.
And particularly for young people, I think younger people were 59% more likely to leave than older people. So the future, the lifeblood of an organization. Black employees were more likely to leave than white. Women were more likely to leave than men. People with a disability were more likely to leave than people with a non-disability. And it's, I think those issues about underrepresented groups, it probably indicates something a little bit more as well. Why do they prefer hybrid working? Mm-hmm. Is it because generally they're not as happy with the workplace? Is it because they're not able to talk about their disability or their protected characteristic in the same way as others? Do they prefer to feel, safe in their home and miss out on other stuff? But, that's more important to them than being a member in an office. That's in the hypothesis, but across all of those protected characteristic groups, there's a bigger preference for hybrid working, and I think that indicates something other than just that's what they want. It's probably what they need as well from their perception.
And have you come across in your kind of studies and research? And I know every company will be different and will have different kind of needs and wants, but have you come across an organization that seemed to have got things right, at least in the short term, in terms of their hybrid working, balancing the needs of the employer and the employee, while maintaining kind of those diverse voices and also kind of collaboration, teamwork, those kind of important aspects of the job?
Yeah, I mean, Accenture in the UK do a really good job. I mean, they've invested in employee engagement for years and years in advance. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the sort of the surveys that were done in 2018, 2019, fluidity in the workplace was seen as the big issue. That's what people wanted before the pandemic. They wanted more control. They didn't want to be burnt out. They didn't want to be in a situation like their parents, dying when they were sort of just after retirement because work had taken so much out of them. They wanted to actually have that balance. And Accenture, I think, have been really at the forefront, along with many other big financial and consulting companies, understanding the importance of well-being and flexible working and diversity and inclusion. And particularly in the States as well, that they realize that, that salespeople need to reflect the ethnicity of the people who they're selling to. You're much more likely to trust and buy, if you're, let's say, if you're a Venezuelan farmer and you're looking for tractors, if you've got a Venezuelan salesman, you're more likely to have that trust at an early stage. Yeah. And so they get that. They've got that in the United States earlier than in Europe. Okay. And organizations there have been really invested in diversity and inclusion, engagement and well-being because it affects the bottom line. Mm-hmm. It's a positive. So the big organizations who've got the resources to be able to set up their own well-being teams, mm-hmm. to be able to train their line managers in the importance of this, have tended to stay ahead of the game. And I think the public sector has caught up quickly, but it just must make sure that the bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of it, and that it mustn't stifle that innovation and creativity which all the research says must be given to managers to allow them to get the best out of their teams.
And our mutual friend, Carrie Cooper, really believes in the importance of kind of line managers, the important role they have, certainly from a well-being perspective, diversity and inclusion perspective also, I'm sure. What kind of supports can companies offer to these kind of critical employees, if you like, in the chain? Is it training? Is it support? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what they mustn't do is say to somebody who's managed in a particular way in a department for, say, 25, 30 years, suddenly haul them up in front of the HR person and say, well, I'm sorry, but, you're a bit of a dinosaur. Your staff say that you don't understand their well-being as much as other people. And, we're not very happy about it. And that's the first time that this manager has heard that in 30 years.
Yeah.
Up until then, they've been treated as a star. They've been seen as a great technical or operational or scientific manager. And then suddenly they say, well, no, you've been doing it all wrong for 30 years. And the answer is they haven't been doing it all wrong for 30 years. They've done what's expected of them by the culture of the organization. So the key message, I think, is that if an organization, and of course organizations should do, but if an organization is saying, okay, we need now to really, really increase managers' input into well-being, into diversity and inclusion, you have to hold their hands for a bit. You have to allow them to make mistakes. You have to actually allow them to express their concern and their worries about stuff. And, in some cases, at the end of that process, the manager may say, well, this isn't for me. I just don't think I've got the skills. I haven't got the mindset to be able to get around that. I've tried. And then in most organizations, there should be the opportunity for somebody to move into a more technical role, into a more operational role, where they're not responsible for the welfare and support and management of teams. So big organizations should be able to cope with that. And I do know of organizations who have done that and have done it successfully. And it's a win-win situation. The manager is now concentrating on something that he or she loves. And, that somebody with more enhanced emotional intelligence and more enhanced ability to gain the trust of teams, is now in charge of the line management.
That makes so much sense to me. I've seen some excellent technical managers. I've worked with them for many years, but they just weren't. They weren't people. They weren't people managers. They just wasn't there. It didn't come naturally to them. I'm just wondering, have you seen? Is it in organizations like that supports those transitions? Does it come naturally though? Or are they willing to give it up? Do they kind of see that it's not their skill, or are they? Does that be kind of taken away from them? I'm guessing. Does the technical manager know they're not a good people manager, or do they have to be told?
Yeah, I think deep inside they probably do, but it's very difficult for them to admit that. And what you'll tend to find as well is that people who were their team members who were critical of them in the past in terms of their managerial skills and their ability to listen and to empathize and so on, as soon as that manager is seen to be in any way at risk, suddenly the people who were criticizing them will rally to their support. And that's just a human instinct. People do have loyalty to people, even though they may think that they're not always as they should do. And I think that the key thing here is to actually do this in partnership and to get the individual manager to realize that this is something where, here's another opportunity for them, and, perhaps in 6 weeks' time, they're probably breathing a sigh of relief and saying, thank goodness I don't have to do appraisals anymore, because I hated them and I worried about them and I didn't do them very well. And it really stressed me. I must admit, if I had my life again, would I want to be managing, big teams? It's stressful. It really is stressful. And, I think I'd have stayed doing my cricket and tried to become a cricketer for Lancashire, which was my objective at the time, but which I wasn't quite good enough. But, to actually, managing people is the toughest thing. It really is. And, to try and empathize is difficult for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a bit of a trend at the moment, and it's being done it's happening for the right reasons, is, I guess, to equip certainly line managers, but other employees in the organization then as well with, let's say, kind of a mental health first aid skills or equivalent. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's putting a lot of responsibility on these individuals, and maybe they've just done a 2-day course So I mean, they're far from experts in the area of mental health, but I think there's possibly an expectation then from the organization that they are, and that they can kind of solve any mental health issues that may arise amongst colleagues. It's a little bit of an unfair expectation. I just wonder, are we getting the balance right there, or can we communicate this a lot better? That side of things.
I agree, Brian. I mean, I'm a great supporter of mental health first aid. I think it is a good product. The problem is it's not been implemented effectively across all organizations. Yeah. I mean, I've heard some horror stories of people who've had significant mental health concerns, people who have been thinking about suicide, going to see their HR business partner and saying, I'm feeling really, really vulnerable. I'm, reaching out to get some help. And the HR person saying, well, have you spoken to your mental health first aider? And I've heard of mental health first aiders being called out at 2 o'clock in the morning because individuals are saying, I'm going to throw myself off the balcony. And, that is totally and utterly inappropriate for organizations to put volunteers in those situations. Mental health first aid is about helping people identify at an early stage when colleagues may be suffering distress, when they may be at the beginning of a significant issue. It's not about solving their problems. It's not about doing HR's work. It's not about doing the line manager's work. It's about helping individuals to come forward and ask for help, but not from the mental health first aider.
Yeah.
And, I think a number of organizations have implemented things like mental health first aid as a tick box. Okay, yeah, we're really interested in well-being because, we've got 7 or 8 people trained and, we're committed to this. And if it hasn't changed the culture, if the HR and the lead and the line management hasn't changed, then it's worthless and it's not fair on the individuals who are putting themselves forward, to be volunteers in difficult circumstances.
Yeah, now very well said. And I agree with everything you said there. It's a really good program. I think the issue is if it's just left with the 2 days training and that's it, and over to you, mental health first aiders, kind of solve all our problems. Where it's the whole package really required of kind of communication first about what the mental health first aiders are and what they do, and who they are, and then it's the signposting piece and the continuous ongoing support for the first aiders and for the wider organization then as well.
Yeah, where I saw it work really quite well, I would say this, wouldn't I, was in Public Health England. And, managers there clearly understood the importance of supporting people's mental health. But we also had an infrastructure of staff networks. So, these were people who put themselves forward to represent the views of their colleagues from particular different protected characteristics. So we had a Muslim network, we had a Christian network, we had a LGBTQ network, we had a mental health network. And these were fantastic because our chief executive gave them real authority. So he used to meet with them on a regular basis, the heads of each of these staff networks, and hear what it was really like being somebody who was from an Asian background working in, say, the south of England, where there were very few non-white people working. What was it like for people, not to hear it through me as a filter, but to hear it from people who really represented the things. And so we had mental health first aiders as well, but they also knew that we had this mental health network, we had mental health experts, we had a chief executive who was interested in mental health and was very clear about that and the messaging that went out. So in a situation like that, it's going to work really, really well.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious, that's almost like a protected environment as such. But I think the lessons about that can be shared by all organizations about having it as an integrated part of management and support.
Absolutely, yeah, and I like we can all learn from that. Yeah, I like the structure, and I like the senior leadership kind of key engagement and involvement with each of the networks. I think that's really important, isn't it?
Oh, the network leads were really appreciated it. I mean, they really did. And, I wasn't there when they met with the chief executive. It was a one-to-one conversation. It was an open conversation so that, the real messages could get through.
Tell me about the compassionate management, the social movements that you set up while you were at Public Health England.
Yeah, gosh, this came about through a whole series of reasons. I think working at Public Health England, you suddenly realized that HR was much, much broader than hiring and firing and mandatory training and employee relations and writing long, detailed policies which nobody read.
Mm.
And I'd also been fortunate to work with two individuals who and I know it sounds a bit corny, but they really did change my life. The first one was a guy called Aidan Halligan from Dublin. And Aidan was an obstetrician, and we understand that he was offered the chief executive role at the HSE, but turned it down. And the folklore is, he said that he turned it down because he'd had the offer of a more important job, which was to help a homeless charity in the East End of London. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of mythology about Aidan, and he was a great storyteller, but he was the most inspirational person I've ever worked with. I mean, Aidan died in his late 50s. He didn't wake up one morning. He was diabetic, and he hadn't told anybody he was diabetic. And I remember he used to work in a University College Hospital where he ran the NHS Staff College. And he used to run it by bringing people in from the armed forces who'd been there in life or death situations to actually be able to help people, for example, in accident and emergency departments, to cope with Saturday nights in inner cities. And I remember that the day after Aidan died, on Warren Street tube station, there was a whiteboard where you left messages about trains being delayed or such and such. And somebody had written, you know, leadership is about doing the right thing on a difficult day. Aidan Halligan, rest in peace. It was one of his favorite sayings. And Aidan had gone over to Camp Basra in Afghanistan to actually help the A&E departments there on the front line operate more effectively. And one of the first things he did, allegedly, again folklore, was that he immediately replaced the chief surgeon who was in charge of the team with one of the orderlies who had allegedly better people skills. Right. And said to the surgeon, you concentrate on cutting people and stitching them up and saving their lives. And this guy will deal with the sort of the infrastructure and the operations and how it all works and how people get on with each other. And if it wasn't absolutely true, it should be true, because that's the sort of thing he would have said. He was an incredible inspirational person and impossible to tie down, hated bureaucracy, but this great inspiration. And I was fortunate enough to work with him for about 7 or 8 months when he was the leadership consultant to Public Health England. And, you know, we bonded straight away, and we just, you know, he was like my big brother, and learned so much from him, and learned to be more courageous than I had been in the past. You know, I'd been part of the system. I'd been part of the HR police force who were there to catch people out. And Aidan said, you know, Tony said, you know, you've wasted 30 years of your career. You've got the opportunity in the next few years to make up for it. And then I worked for a guy called Gareth Goodyear. Gareth was an Australian doctor who became the chief executive of the Royal Brompton and Harefield Hospital when I was there. And Gareth, again, was this charismatic, incredible leader who had become the lead in the Australian healthcare system for HR, despite the fact he was a doctor, and who basically called out senior people if they behaved inappropriately. He introduced anti-bullying training into Brompton and Harefield. I think it was one of the first hospitals to do that. To set an example. You know, he expected the most senior people in the organization to behave the best. And, you know, I remember when his wife died of cancer at an early age. I mean, she got a 6 months diagnosis, and Gareth managed to continue running the hospital. Despite the fact he was at her bedside, he was over in Brisbane when she was in her last few days. And he used to kind of send us inspirational messages. You know, he used to send us pictures of sunsets, you know, in Australia, that kept his wife going. It was something to look forward to till the end of the day. And, you know, we used to come into the office and look forward to seeing the picture of the sunset and hearing how his wife is doing. And I think, to sum it up, when Lynn died, about 6 hours after Lynn died, Gareth phoned me up from Australia and said that she'd passed away. She was surrounded by her family, that she wasn't in pain. And he really regretted he'd never been able to take her to see Man United play. and he had a season ticket at Chelsea. And he said that, I know you and Tom, my son, you've been trying to get tickets for the first game of the season. If you go along to the ticket office at Stamford Bridge and give this number, then there's 2 tickets for you and Tom to watch the game and enjoy the match, mate. I'll see you in 2 weeks. So when you work for somebody like that, all of the stuff that you've learned in the past just goes out the window.
Mm-hmm.
You can't behave the way that you did as a policeman, as somebody who was more interested in the bottom line than people. And, when I was in my 20s and my 30s, it was all about meeting targets. It was all about reducing costs. It was all about making redundancies. It was all about keeping people within policies. And, I bought into it. Mm-hmm. Because, that was the only way to get promotion. And thank goodness the HR community and people like Peter Cheese, people like Kerry Cooper, people like Gareth Goodyear, people like Aidan Halligan said, enough's enough. We can't operate like this. No wonder managers looked down on HR people in the past. No wonder that society perhaps looks down on HR people. They're seen as being overly bureaucratic, a little bit woolly, a little bit fluffy or whatever. Mm-hmm. In fact, what was happening was that these were the people who were kind of carrying out the dismissals and the disciplinary action. And it was a no-win situation. They had to actually say, look, if you want us in an organization, we're there to maintain standards. We're there to help you look after people. I remember being told by some chief executives, Tony, you must never appoint somebody in an interview if you ask the question, why do you want to work in HR? And they say, it's because I enjoy working with people. Never, ever appoint somebody like that. But thank goodness that the profession has changed so quickly. And, I sometimes think, should we keep talking about well-being? Should we keep talking about diversity and inclusion? Should we keep talking about the importance of engagement? And the answer is we have to, because it goes backwards very quickly. As soon as you don't do it, then the old stuff, the old bottom line stuff comes in. And that will be a huge retrograde step for the profession and for organizations.
And thanks for sharing that amazing detail on those inspirational leaders. Is the compassionate management, that social movement, was it initially for HR leaders?
No, I mean, basically I had a conversation with a great guy called Justin Varney. Justin is currently the public health director for Birmingham in the UK and doing a fabulous job there. And he was in charge of adult health at Public Health England. And I was talking about my experiences and, how I was determined I was going to change the way I operated. And he said, okay, I'll set you a task, Tony, set up a compassionate leadership social movement. Mm-hmm. If you get an email from somebody from Public Health England saying, well, I'd like to invite you to join a new initiative called the Compassionate Leadership, and we're going to share stories, we're going to spread the message that it's hugely important for leaders to have these well-developed skills to look after their staff. It's the most important thing that they should do. It's very difficult when you approach somebody who says, well, I'm not going to join that because I disagree with that. So it was bound to be successful because people would say, no, I'm not interested in being nice to people.
Yeah.
And we within a short period of time, we actually got a whole series of senior chief executives from public sector, private sector, from government, from charities, from think tanks or whatever, who said, yeah, I'll sign up. And I used to spend the Friday afternoon sharing stories with people that other people had sent through. And I was doing it via email. I mean, you want to think now, rather than doing it on WhatsApp or other social media, it was so basic. Mm-hmm. But people really look forward to hearing stories from other people about what they've done and motivational stuff that made it the last week. And particularly if you got them on a Friday afternoon, you're thinking, well, actually, next week I'm going to actually think about this. I'm going to think about trying this initiative. I'm going to think about behaving like this. And what I found was that when you do stuff, you start behaving like that. I've been brought up by a tough Irish mother who basically said that people only get what they deserve, and you have to make your way in life. And all these people on social security. I don't want my son ever like this. You know, I used to hear all this from my mum when I was growing up in Manchester. And, you know, to the extent where, you know, I would have never have given money to somebody on the streets, to a homeless person. I would have thought immediately, yeah, my mum said that they're probably there, and there's probably a Mercedes around the corner, and they're there kind of collecting money for some, you know, for some organization, whatever. It's not for them. And, you know, that was my mindset. And when I actually started thinking about compassion issues and you know, being kind to people, then suddenly I started giving money. And it was because, well, I should. You know, I can't be saying all of this stuff and not behaving that way. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you actually get involved in things like this, you'll start behaving like that. Otherwise, you shouldn't be involved in it. I found it just incredibly, you know, for 2 years or whatever. I just remember using that compassion word all the time. And now I don't use it at all, apart from in discussions like this, because it's been hijacked.
Right.
You know, every politician now will talk about the need for compassionate leadership and compassionate policies, and I'm a compassionate person. It's been totally overused, and all of the, you know, when it was used to be referred to Princess Diana or Mother Teresa or Aidan Halligan or Gareth Goodyear, then it really meant something. But now I think the words become cheapened, and I just talk now about fairness.
Okay.
Being fair.
But on the practical side of things, just before we move on, I'm a former project manager, just trying to understand the movement. So it was as simple as maybe you curating an email once a week initially. Did it lead to events, kind of gatherings, webinars? And I think I did see, I know, because you sent me on there's a document that came out of I think it was your work with Carrie Cooper and the UK Forum on Health and Wellbeing at Work. There's actually, is it a compassionate guide to the workplace or something like that?
That's right. I mean, what happened was that some academic organisations, you know, were invited to join, and they helped us organise the first conference. And we had some really fantastic guest speakers, you know, from all levels of industry and the public sector. And I got to know Carrie Cooper really through this work. And you know, it resonated with Carrie, and you know, I was invited to become a member of the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work, which you presented to about a couple of months ago. Talking about all the great work happening in Ireland. And you know, I said, look, you know, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it really naively. You know, I need an infrastructure to take this forward. And I said, Carrie, can the group take it forward as the sort of the lead for it? And Carrie said yes. And so one of the first things that we did as a forum, and these are senior HR directors, senior medical directors, wellbeing directors from some of the biggest multinationals in the world. So you got Shell, BP, BBC, Marks and Spencer, Barclays, etc., etc., etc. One of the first things that we produced was a compassionate work toolkit, and it's now standard practice in police forces in the UK as part of their sort of learning and development program. And you know, I remember Andy Rhodes, who's the Chief Constable for Northwest England in Lancashire, and who's the wellbeing lead for the police service, saying, you know, he wants his constables, having had a terrible week, having had to deal with suicides, having to deal with road traffic accidents, drug overdoses, domestic abuse, hit and runs, on Friday, when they are called to actually give bad news to a mother that their child's just been run over. He wants those constables to deal with it just as compassionately as they would be able to do on a Monday morning before the horrors of the week ahead. And they made it an integral part of the way that their officers were expected to operate. And it's tough, and people make mistakes, and you've got to forgive people. But it was a strong message out from the top that this is the way that they expect people to operate. And, you know, and in the armed forces, I was talking about Aidan Halligan and the Staff College, which was utilised skills from a number of forces trainers. And, you know, the whole thing about Ernest Shackleton's management style was a constant message that went through. And it was a real message, I think, that went through to the NHS as well. You know, Shackleton always vowed he would never lose a man because it was men who were there. A man on one of his expeditions, Shackleton would give up his gloves and get frostbite in his hands to his team, because that's what a leader should do. And Shackleton, I think, is one of the most revered leaders that the UK has ever produced, and he's still this incredible role model, and somebody who put people in danger because of his activities, but who tried to do it in a way that actually put them first and put himself last. And when you hear about the old thing about the captain going down with his ship or whatever, all those traditional things that perhaps have been lost. A leader's role is to look after their team first and foremost. The welfare of their team is the most important thing. And it's great that, that people like Peter Cheese are still saying that now as head of the CIPD profession. It's still as relevant now as it ever was.
Yeah, excellent example. And there's a lot of senior leaders out there in organizations, and I'm thinking in governments as well, that could take a leaf out of people like Shackleton's books and some of the inspirational leaders that you've mentioned there as well. It's great to hear that the UK Forum, that brilliant network that Kerry has brought together, was able to kind of work on your idea and your input and develop a really great, that toolkit that you mentioned, the compassionate toolkit, and I'll share that in the article that goes out with this podcast. Tell me more about your involvement, or maybe what you've learned from the group. I mean, I've been at one session, but I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think there was a review of the management standards, and it was a kind of feedback on that, which was fantastic. Like, it's just a brilliant kind of hub, isn't it? A forum for trying to learn from each other, but to improve upon, let's say, whatever's there, or any kind of new ideas that we, as a group, can kind of bring to the wider population.
Yeah, I mean, what I love is that you'll get people from organizations which might well be in competition with each other. If you looked at it, on a blank piece of paper, actually sharing information about how they have about the successes they've had with staff management, about the mistakes they've made, about what works for them for well-being, what works for them for diversity and inclusion, and sharing this with colleagues from other competitors. And one of the messages that I've always said to the group is, make sure that the supply chain is supported as well. Here we are with these big organizations with great resources. We're lucky. We've got big HR teams. We've got big leadership programs. We've got big occupational health and well-being teams. But often our suppliers, who are so crucial to what we produce, don't. So let's offer them free service. Let's provide that. And look at all the issues that have happened over the course of the last couple of years with supply chains. I'm always just really impressed about just how humble they are, and just share information and, learning about stuff, and, being critical where they think that wouldn't work for them, but respecting that does work for the other organization. I mean, we produced a financial well-being guide for managers as well, which, before the current sort of nightmares of the cost of living increases, there were still huge numbers of people in poverty, and huge numbers of working people in poverty, particularly women, particularly single parents, who were having to live, on less than £200 a week, including rental income and so on and so forth. I mean, I always used to, last summer, I bought 2 Genesis tickets to go to see them in Manchester, and it came £300. And put that into perspective, that would have kept a family of 2 kids with a single parent for the best part of 2 weeks. And that we can so easily forget the issues that other people are suffering, and it's since I've moved to Dublin as well, I've noticed huge different levels of poverty across different parts of the city. I went to Coolock to actually get my PSE card after I'd just joined, and there was a whole series of vulnerable people there. You could just see the poverty in the area, and people having great customer service and looking after each other, but really, really big levels of poverty. And then you contrast that. I was down in Greystones over the weekend and down on the south side, and and it's like any city, but a city like Dublin has got the wherewithal to make it fairer for everybody, as Manchester has, as London tries. Andy Burnham is a close follower of the National Forum, and he wanted us to help him with his big push on making good work, so that basically every employer has to meet required minimum standards about the sort of jobs that are on offer to people in terms of security and the way they'll be treated, their continuity and so on. So, because of the people around that forum, it's very influential because of the names there. And people want to work with us to actually help get good stuff done.
Yeah.
And also we will speak out to government where we feel that government have not got it right. And you need to put more emphasis on things. And Carey is regularly on the red sofas on BBC One and the radio, talking about this stuff and just stressing the importance that this really, really matters. And, we had this huge honeymoon period during the pandemic where everybody was talking about kindness and well-being and so on. But, it can go backwards very quickly. And a lot of the stats show that it's dropping down the agenda now as other more financial issues bite. And what we would say is get your well-being right, get your retention right, get people to stay with you, treat them well, and the financial issues will look after themselves.
Brilliant. Yeah. And given the names and the organizations that are represented in the forum, like people, governments, I'm sure will listen to what is being said and what is being asked. What's next? What's in your opinion? What does the future of work look like? And is it something maybe the forum have some interesting future topics in mind? I don't know, but any thoughts on what the...
Yeah, I'm doing some work with Armstrong Craven, which is a specialist recruiter and talent analysis organization looking at difficult to recruit groups. And that the flexibility issue is just absolutely key. And the worldwide job market now, people have proven that they can work effectively. Okay, we're both in Dublin at the moment, but we could just as easily be sat in Santiago in Chile and in Vladivostok or whatever, and that we could still be having this communication. And so increasingly that global market, I think, will work. And again, the States are well in advance of that. They realize the importance of being able to get labour markets and to understand the logic of labour markets and how they work. And they'll be the companies who are attracting the best talents and actually getting them from all over the world. I mean, Google have done fantastic work in Ireland as well. And I'm a great believer that organisations can be fantastic role models. If they've got the resources, they can do real good. They can make money for their shareholders, yes, but most importantly, they can actually change communities. Yeah. And I think that any organization now which operates inappropriately, unethically, will be shamed on social media.
Yeah, definitely.
And good, the media as well, the more traditional paper media, are getting much, much better now at calling out inappropriate behavior by business leaders. The stuff that happened with P&O in the UK a few months ago, that it was all over the press and there was huge amounts of criticism. And, I think that is a healthy thing, that people are held to account, and that chief executives have got a huge responsibility, not just for their teams, but also for the communities that they serve, and they should be responsible and held accountable for that. So I think the future of work is going to be more positive. However, having said all of that, we're talking in a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I mean, who knows what's going to happen in parts of the world where dictators are still surviving and thriving. And, that there is, I think all that we can do is that we can act as role models, that we can actually, in democracies, we can operate as we should do. Mm-hmm. And, that the people in dictatorships looking at this through their social media will realize that there is another better way to do this. So I think that there is going to be this ongoing us and them situation over the course of the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, who knows?
Yeah.
But I do think, that the human spirit is something which generally does good in the end, when it's allowed to, when it's given the space, when it's given the responsibility, when it's given a bit of freedom, people do the right thing. It's when people are under pressure that they tend to do the wrong thing.
I agree that so we as individuals can lead by example, and organizations too absolutely can in democratic parts of the world. And I was just thinking when you were speaking there, I think people now, the generation coming through now, they want to work for an organization that has a real purpose.
Yeah.
It's not just, so yes, quality of life, work-life balance, flexibility, salary, all important, but they want a real purpose behind what they're doing, and why they're coming into work every day. So if an organization isn't kind of demonstrating that or providing that purpose, then I think they will move elsewhere.
Yeah, my son said exactly the same. He's 25. He works in sort of events management or whatever, and he loves music and he wants to run festivals and so on and so forth. But he said he would never ever work for a big organization that he felt more. He just wouldn't do it, even if they paid him 3 times. And I believe him.
People want to be proud about who they're working for and what they're working for.
Totally so. Yeah.
Listen, you've been very generous with your time, Tony. How are you managing to spend time in your own well-being, or are you? I mean, is cricket involved? Would I be right?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I fell down a flight of stairs in my 40s and took my pelvis out, and I had to give up cricket at the time. And I went along to Malahide to sign up as an umpire, and they said, no, we need you to play on a Friday night for the Taverners. Right. I think they regretted it after about the first couple of balls when I had to almost be carried off. But I'm playing again next Friday. But yeah, so I hadn't played for 14, 15 years, but I just love the spirit of cricket, and we take it in a we take the mickey out of each other all the time as well. So that's good. And I've joined the RNLI in Howth to kind of help on the fundraising side. And the reason I'm over in Dublin is because we've got 2 little grandkids, Annabelle and Shay, in Clontarf, and try and spend as much time as possible with them. I'm Grandpa Pig from Peppa Pig. That's the role I play for Annabelle.
Fantastic. Well, they'll certainly keep you on your toes anyway. Tony, listen, thanks so much for your time. Where's the best place?
It's been a pleasure.
Where's the best place for people to go to find out more about you and your work?
Well, I've just opened up an Instagram account for my photography. I love landscape photography, and I find that really quite relaxing, actually. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do a bit of travel at the moment. So go onto my Instagram account. But no, if you go onto my LinkedIn account, but more importantly, go on to the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work. They've got a really good website there, which talks about all of their previous work and also their initiatives and so on. And it's just about staying connected and trying to get a balance with stuff going forward. I'm in a fortunate position. I don't need to work to earn money, so I can do stuff that I really want to do. And it was great to meet up with yourself, Brian, and with the people at Trinity as well. And hopefully I can help in some way going forward.
I look forward to that, Tony. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. You take care.
And that's a wrap for this week. Go to workwellpodcast.com if you'd like to access the show notes for this episode. Quick favor to ask. Can you head over to iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review for the Workwell podcast? It would be a huge help. So thank you. If you want to dive deeper in the area of workplace health promotion, if you want to educate yourself in this area, then make sure to check out the Workwell Institute. It's our online learning hub. It's a one-stop shop for all your workplace well-being training needs. You'll find all the details at workwellinstitute.org. By the way, the original music that you're hearing right now was composed by my good friend, Greg Clifford. Check him out at gregcliffordmusic.com. Thanks for listening right to the end. Remember to work well, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode.